member of Arlington staff seems to have tried to intervene and got into some sort of tussle. Arlington isn't saying very much about it. It's only emerged through an NPR report. That's a national public radio here. And the Trump team has said, well, there was one person who seemed to be mentally ill who was trying to intervene in our event when we were invited there. So at the moment, it's a he said sort of situation. But there does seem to have been some sort of kerfuffle. And it just seems that at the moment, we're in a phase where Trump just can't get anything right in this election.
It's 3 years since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, when the Marines, or mostly members of the Marine Corps, were killed. Donald Trump marked that on Monday by, as you say, going to Arlington Cemetery. And for, I think, pretty much your listeners are aware, Arlington Cemetery is a site just outside Washington, D.C., where lots of American war dead are buried. There are thought to be about 400,000 graves at Arlington. He turned up there on Monday to mark this occasion, obviously, I think, making a political point that the withdrawal had been a bit disastrous, and the Biden administration hadn't really understood the speed with which the Taliban was taking control in Afghanistan again. He stood there, as you say, over a grave with his trademark thumbs up sign. And one or two of the Arlington staff, I think, pointed out that there are rules as to how you conduct yourself in Arlington, and one of those is that you're not allowed to take photographs or shoot video at the grave sites, especially those more recent ones. This meant that Trump's people were challenged and they pushed back. Now, Trump's campaign absolutely denies that there was any physical confrontation, just a verbal one. Arlington isn't really commenting, but sources to various US media, which are picking this up, and it's playing very hard here, are saying that there was a physical altercation.
I can't understand how Trump gets away with it. I mean, he trashed John McCain as a loser for being captured by the Viet Cong, even though he endured 5 years of captivity and torture. He trashes people who die in war as losers. Veterans are so important to the American psyche. How does he get away with it?
He's got his grip over the Republican Party, and I mean, he famously said in 2016 that he could stand on Fifth Avenue in New York and shoot someone, and he wouldn't lose any votes. I mean, there is merit to that comment. He gets away with a lot. He's obviously a convicted felon now. He's someone who has his core of support. Now, you know, I'm not a political strategist, but I would have thought trash talking, as they say here, veterans, dead veterans, people who are honoured here in the US, is not necessarily a particularly wise political strategy. But what Donald Trump was trying to point out is that these killed US soldiers are dead because of Joe Biden and his policies, and by extension Kamala Harris, and that as president he would withdraw America from foreign wars. I think that was the point he was trying to make. You're the politician. I'm not sorry.
Yes, much was made of this by the Trump campaign because he was invited to Arlington by the families of the 13 service members who were killed in Afghanistan during the withdrawal. That was on the anniversary on Monday. What's emerged is that there was some kind of altercation between the Trump people and a member of the Arlington staff about filming in a restricted area. So there's a very sensitive part of Arlington called Section 60, which is where recently deceased service members are buried. And that's not to be used for political purposes in any filming or performance or event. And of course, the Trump team were doing that, and a member of Arlington staff seems to have tried to intervene and got into some sort of tussle. Arlington isn't saying very much about it. It's only emerged through an NPR report. That's a national public radio here. And the Trump team has said, well, there was one person who seemed to be mentally ill who was trying to intervene in our event when we were invited there. So at the moment, it's a he said sort of situation. But there does seem to have been some sort of kerfuffle. And it just seems that at the moment, we're in a phase where Trump just can't get anything right in this election. Since Kamala Harris emerged, he's been trying any which way to land a blow. And of course, this was to be weaponized, if you like, this Afghanistan withdrawal anniversary, to try and remind people that the Biden-Harris administration had made a big old mess of withdrawing from Afghanistan to try and score political points But again, it's in danger of being overshadowed and misfiring.
And of course, it would just show the most dreadful lack of respect, though, David, were it to be ascertained for sure that Trump's team have been trampling over such a place of grief and a place in America's heart.
First part of the visit to the cemetery was as part of a ceremony, laying a wreath to honor those soldiers. No problem there. But then Trump and his staff wanted to go to what's called Section 60. Now, Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery is for very recent victims, soldiers who have died, especially in the American interventions in Iraq and in Afghanistan. You can go there on most days and you can see the relatives of those, quite often the wives, the mothers, the fathers, laying flowers, pausing to reflect there. So it's a very special area of a special cemetery. And Trump is going there, and there were a few family members that were there with him. And the immediate thing that's striking is if you look at the photographs there is Trump's giving a thumbs up pose. It's not a somber photograph. It's not a reflective photograph. It's a man who apparently is like, look at me. I'm great. It's a campaign photograph. Now, to get that photograph is where the story, I think, gets challenging, because Arlington has a prohibition on any photography or video which could be election related. It is clear. And while you have had presidents who have gone to Arlington, including those who might run for re-election, they have never abused that rule. When Trump's staff were carrying the cameras in, there was an employee, a young woman, who quite rightly said, look, you're not allowed to bring those in to Section 60. The Trump staff just pushed her aside, just absolutely pushed her aside and just disregarded the rules, disregarded her attempt to enforce the rules, and they proceeded, as we could see, with the photo opportunity. Now, that is the initial point of the story. It is serious enough that Arlington has launched an investigation. It is serious enough that Arlington issued a report on the incident. Now, I don't think technically this is a criminal offense. You have filmed in a restricted area which is the property of the federal government. It won't get to that. Nobody's going to serve jail time or be fined for this. There may be a reprimand of the campaign for this. That's serious enough. There's a second part of the story, however, which is just as troubling to me. When the story came out, and when these facts that I told you came out, the Trump campaign did not offer an apology for what they had done. They didn't even offer an explanation of sense for what they'd done. They said, the family supported Trump being there. Trump is a defender of the military, which is not quite true, which we can't explain. But there was no sense of, now we really shouldn't have broken the rules. Instead, they attacked the young woman who asked them not to film, not to bring the cameras in, and said she was mentally unstable. And I'm not making those words up. That's the words they used, not just from one Trump staff member, but from at least two spokespeople for the campaign. So now what they've done is they've not only broken the rules at Arlington, they have trashed an Arlington employee because, of course, they made this public. They put this out there where you then get the Trumpists to then carry out all types of abuse of this employee, for doing her job.
This, as you're well aware, this is a pattern of outrageous behavior that certainly did not begin with this event and will not end with it either. I mean, I'm old enough to remember during his first campaign when talking about Senator John McCain, who had been the Republican nominee for president, as we all remember, and was had heroic service in the Vietnam War that included many years of being a political prisoner, during which he was tortured. Donald Trump said he liked people who don't get captured. I mean, that to me still remains one of the most stunning and cruel things I have ever heard a political candidate say. And that was about a member of his own political party. And I just think that's an indication of the many ways over many years that former President Trump has just sort of manifested himself as the vice president said, as an unserious man. And in all of these other ways that we've been discussing, whether it's our democracy, whether it's a national abortion ban and overturning Roe versus Wade, it has demonstrated his unfitness. The fact that he presents a vision of this country that would take us backward and really undermine key essential rights, freedoms, and traditions.
Are veterans really part of Trump's base? We don't know how big Trump's base is. This is the whole thing. That the media myth of Trump's base, which will take him to victory, we've had that going on for years. Yeah, I don't think you can classify veterans as being natural supporters of Trump now. They may have been natural supporters in the majority of the Republican Party, but Trump is not the Republican Party. He is nominally the Republican nominee, but he has a faction all into himself. There is now a wider context in this campaign, though, which highlights your valid point that veterans are a very important voting bloc, or important voters, whether or not they vote as a bloc. And that is that the military service issue, which tends to favor Republicans in 2024, goes the other way this time around. It is true that Trump's vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, served in the Marines, but he was a journalist. He was not a soldier. He glosses over that quite often when you hear him talk about his service. Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, served in the Army National Guard for 24 years and served with distinction. Now, because of that sort of advantage that you have in terms of the military service favoring the Democrats, the Trumpists are going all out to try to trash Tim Walz. They've distorted certain statements he made, taken one statement where he actually inaccurately said he carried arms in combat. He was never carried arms in combat. He was answering a question about gun control after a mass killing, and he, sort of incorrectly said, "Oh yeah, I carried arms in combat." What he meant to say is, "I was in the military. I know what it's like to handle firearms." But of course, the Trump folks are trying to say, "Oh, this means Tim Walz is a liar," what they call the stolen valor of the military. So in other words, they've got to tear down Walz to tear down that advantage that the Democrats might have with military figures, especially given the number of people who have come out and talked about what a fine person Tim Walz was in the Army National Guard. Like anything else in this election, I wouldn't want to predict where this breaks. What I would say here is there's a wider issue here. And that is, whatever you think about the American military operations, and I've got issues with the way the military have been used, including in recent years. Whatever you think about American foreign policy and the military's role in it, just as in many other countries, you honor those who risk their lives for your country. You honor them. You do not abuse them. You do not use them as political pawns. You do not trample on their graves, literally trample on their graves for political advantage, especially in an election. And that's what Donald Trump has done. And that's what he will continue to do if he wins this election. No one should be in any doubt about that.